All right, everyone. Welcome in to the Body Movement Podcast. This is take 2 of the opening with my new friend, Matt Beaudreau, out in NoCal, Northern California.
Yeah, man.
Founder, CEO of Acton Academy, and Apogee. Is it Apogee Academy as well, or?
Apogee Strong, Apogee Academy. Yes, sir.
Yep. Really came across him on social media doing some really cool stuff in youth education, prepping our youngsters for life and real life, consulting with Fortune 500s for working with like recent grads that we're going to get into all this stuff. Matt, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Pleasure, man.
It's
It's
awesome.
awesome.
Podcast. Yeah. You're
Man,
talking to
New York folks.
Yeah, we're going manifest destiny, buddy. Coast to coast right now.
That's I told you before when you and I connected, man. All my family's New Englanders, a bunch of East Coasters, man. So
yeah, that's right.
It's good stuff.
And I've been following you on social for a long time too. As we started getting into this podcast game, just like we just a few common connections with Ad Lattimore that you had on yours, and he was our first guest.
Cool.
And just saw some really interesting conversations going, some free thinking, some bucking of narratives, and how that's actually driving results. And it's just not, it's not just saying things to say things and to get attention. It's like you're actually trying to do action. And if you follow Matt on Instagram, some things I'm critical of a lot of people that I'm friends with on socials, they're just quote mavens, just sharing quotes and sharing quotes and sharing quotes. And you do that too, but you're a man of action. And these are things I've internalized and put into practice, so.
I appreciate you saying that, because that's, I love a good quote as much as the next person, but if it's not going to be something that you're going to integrate into the way you are actually living, then it comes across as hypocrisy. And that is the last thing on earth that I will ever support. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
Yeah. And I even get critical of people doing it, and sometimes guilty of it myself, of like making all these quotes around greatness. And it's coming from a lot of people that are kind of average too, so here you are, kind of, we were talking before the podcast, you're punching up in weight class, so to speak, on the level and notoriety of the guests you get on yours. You're making a real impact in an institution that's flawed, which is something we're trying to do, which is a reason I reached out to you. So it's beyond just the inaction and hypocrisy, but it's also like the actual level of accomplishment. Even if you're, and again, I don't want to disparage people from trying, but there is a level of like, you can't be quoting some, you can be aspiring for that, but to actually reach a level of accomplishment, I'm going to take that more at face value when it comes from somebody like you doing what you're doing.
No, and I appreciate that. And make no mistake, like I'm the most average dude on the planet. I think I'm average. My work ethic is not average. My drive is definitely not average. My commitment to a mission is not average. Which is why, everything that we're doing, from the podcast to Apogee to Acton, all of those are really different pieces of that same mission. It's different lanes on that same highway moving forward, and that movement is far from average, so I'm pumped to be a part of it. But
so again, really just really big fan of your social and your posts and your messages, and then supplement it and coupling it with what the actual actions are doing. So it's it's a good message, and it's something we're aspiring to do. We're 12 episodes in. We've been doing this for like 8 weeks. So it's going to be like, I'm looking forward to like, you're one of the guys we're chasing, not to compete with, but like, that's where we want to go. And, so
that's awesome.
Thanks for having me.
And that's one of those things. It's not even it's not a competition. It's everybody. There's room for room for everybody. For everybody to be successful. That's one of the biggest messages that we give the kids here is, man, you're not sacrificing your own, achievements and success, or by helping your brothers and sisters over here get there too, man. No, there's room for everybody. Especially when you start talking about things that are not average. There's always, I think Tom Billy says, there's always room for the winners, right? Like if you're going to go and do something above and beyond, you're not going to have a ton of competition, man, because most people aren't willing to put in the time.
It's not a zero-sum game.
I think that's true and that's kind of part of our deal too, is it's true through everything. Like I'm healthcare, right? Like I'm healthcare, and that is, healthcare is below average overall everywhere. So, if you're even acting average and trying to do a little bit extra, the care is lost. And if you're going above and beyond, it's not, and I think this is a societal issue. It's not unique to one discipline. It's everywhere. And that's right. What we're working through. And, that when somebody says, I know Matt and I talk about this a lot, but I'm in a cash-based PT practice now, and so much criticism breaking out of the insurance world. Not necessarily criticism, but like fear for me from people. Right. Like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? I'm like, yeah, and it didn't take me long to build this business. We're hiring, we're within 8 months, Yeah. So I think it's fear and just kind of that, I don't know what it is, like from that standpoint to bust out of below average or average. Like
it's exactly fear.
Uncertainty.
It's exactly fear. It's exactly what you said. Like what you end up finding out is anytime you're doing anything that's outside the quote unquote norm, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter what, like you're doing that, it's going to trigger everybody's fear. And you're going to see most people actually live in fear, which is why most people gravitate towards comfort. And comfort usually is, well, what are most people doing? If most people are doing it, I'm going to be comfortable doing it because I'm going to feel like I'm making the right decision. I'm also going to get the validation from all those other people that are in that same pool of being comfortable, right? And so we're all going to be happy right there. And when somebody else goes outside of that, well, then again, if I like them, then it's maybe fear for them. If I don't like them, then I'm going to criticize them because they're triggering something in me, right? I mean, that's a human, like you said, that's across industries. That's a human nature thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just a great segue to get into how you first did that. Like you were one of the first dudes in education to start like pushing this. And again, like, the parallel and the reason I reached out to you is because what Allison's doing, like, she left the health insurance because you can't, the way our healthcare system is built, you can't treat people the most effectively. It's built to scale people out. It's built to cookie cutter solutions and get patients in and out. And even if you're a good physician, the incentive to get so many people in there and just treat them cookie cutter so you can get more people in doesn't lead to good outcomes. And I think there's a big parallel in education. So can we do, and I'm sure you've done this 100,000 times, just kind of give, the overview of Acton, the overview of Apogee, how you started, and you're talking to two people who are kind of near and dear to the old school education system. Not that we're fond of it, because we're kind of both woken up to, man, how did we get to where we were actually being in that system? My mom was a middle school Catholic school teacher. She came up, she went back, got her degree. She was an assistant superintendent, finished out her last 10, 15 years. She taught at a correctional facility in between there, teaching like 5th, 6th grade curriculum to prisoners at a medium security correctional facility.
Very cool.
Always preach, like, get your degree, get your college. I went and got my MBA. Allison got her doctorate. We both graduated with many dollars in loans.
I have no doubt.
So, and I've kind of not regretted it but in a way I've regretted it, just like finally seeing how successful I was. And I was like, you know what, I could have probably gotten there in a different way if I knew back what I did, but that's not what was ever preached to me. There was there wasn't another option. Or if it was, it wasn't, out there in the public sphere being pushed. And so I'm curious to so again, just the overview of Acton Apogee, how you got there. I know you have the teacher and education background, but just how it all got started, the manifesting of the idea, and where you are today.
Super cool. Yeah, man. I mean, what we're talking about is from the very beginning, you're talking about systems, right? You're, like you said, systems of putting people through, and what is the best way to create a system so that we can have the majority of people. And I don't think that majority of people doing one thing. And it's a smart thing for business. You look at Ray Dalio's book, Principles, and everything is getting back to systems. When you've got a number of people, like, you have to have systems in place. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. What's a bad thing is when you are, somebody's entire physical, again, when you start talking about individual things that matter, individual minds, individual bodies, and you start going, okay, well, how do we systematize this so that we can get customers and perpetual customers, and we keep the system going, and all of a sudden what you're sustaining is not people, you're sustaining a system. That's where you get dangerous, right? That's what you guys saw in healthcare. It's more about sustaining the system than the person. Right? In education, it has become that. It's become more important to sustain the system, because we have 92% of our kids in public or traditional style schools, the biggest monopoly going. Right. And so how do we sustain that system versus how do we actually educate young people? And so, I had somebody ask me a long time ago, well, how do we just subvert that from the inside? Like, how do we change the system from the inside? I was like, well, how do you change the Vatican from the inside? Right. You don't. There's so much money, politics, power. Like, there's so many reasons for it not to change. You're not going to. You have to go build something different, and that was kind of the impetus behind all this. And I want to make sure, kudos to your mom, and kudos to, like, I am the biggest supporter of teachers, educators, administrators. I am the biggest supporter of those people,
right?
The individuals,
right?
The system is my enemy. The system they were working within is soulless. So I don't have any qualms saying, hey, I am not for that system. And it gets to be more and more true as time goes on. And so what I want to be, if we have educators that are listening to this that are saying, nope, that's not true because I was in there, and this, you're not wrong. It's been a long tail game. It wasn't as detrimental 30, 40 years ago as it is now. It was not. It wasn't perfect. Nothing is perfect. Acton's not perfect, right? There's no such, because we're talking about people, so nothing's perfect. But it wasn't as messed up as it is today. And it's been a slow boil to where we're getting to the point where now I am fully confident in saying it's actually dangerous, the system that we have of public schools, including most universities. So I really believe we're getting to that point of it being dangerous. And so, but again, I'm very supportive of those people. I still work with them. I was a public school teacher. I was a public school administrator. I was at Stanford for a long time. I still work with universities all over the world. I was in traditional private schools as a teacher and administrator. So I understand this game inside and out, right? I'm coming from that same thing, which was the impetus of like, okay, now I got to leave and go create something different for my kids. You start to see from a development standpoint, we are not equipped to work with kids individually, developmentally. It's, oh no, we need more academia earlier and more often. And what we're seeing is negative returns from that, but we're pushing that because funding requires it, because now state standards require it, because again, all these little slow drips into what we've got to do system wise. And it's actually breaking kids while culture is actually breaking down. And it's a symbiotic relationship. We're now breaking kids in this system that they come out of 12 years. They don't understand who they are, what value they have to offer. They can't think for themselves. They're outsourcing all of their thought, right? They've never actually had any kind of self-awareness. They're not building self-confidence because they're just being told what to do and they kind of hate it. You got all these problems. So then they come out and they're these adults that then can't have a real conversation. So if you're looking like you're in the other gang, whether that other gang is you're a different religion, or that other gang is you're a different, if I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat, or whatever that is, well, then we just have to fight because we don't understand how to actually have a conversation. And then that just perpetuates the whole cycle. So, it's a very multifaceted conversation, but at the end of the day, as I saw this playing out more and more and more, and as I was having my own children, it was like, cool. Well, we've got a decision to make for my kids at this point. They're not going into a traditional system. Doesn't matter if it's a private school that still models itself after a public school, like they're not going in there. So what does more of an ideal look like? And when I say an ideal, it needs to be malleable. It needs to be able to shift and change every year, because the world is shifting and changing every single year now.
Yeah. I mean, that's something with Ray Dalio. That's with Ray Dalio's book. Like, while he has those systems, he has that as a cycle. right? Which is key why he's been able to stay where he is, because he's like, we need to continuously test and reevaluate what's going on.
Bingo.
And also the questions that are being asked, I'm sure you will confirm, is the questions that are probably being asked at school is like, oh, well, what's the test score look like for this school and this age demographic? And that is the wrong question to ask. It's not even, is this all working?
Yeah. Who cares?
Right.
Who cares? Like, who cares? Like, how many clients, how many clients right now, Allison, come into you and they're like, hey, here's my problem. I'm hoping you can help me fix this. But before we get down into like my problem, I need to know what you got on your report card in 8th grade in algebra. Like, how did you do? Nobody cares.
Right.
Nobody asks what your standardized test scores are. You look at your favorite entrepreneurs and people that you find you didn't ask me what my standardized test scores were before you allowed me to come on the podcast. Nobody cares. So why do we have such a hardcore, focus on hyper focus? Well, we're hyper focused on it because we're told to hyper focus on it, because that's how the schools get funding. And then we're tricked because of that. You're tricked into believing that somehow that focus on academia is then where all of success and happiness and all of that flows from. Provably false. It's not hard to get people to follow the logic train that's not the focus, right? So what Acton does is we flip the script. Are academics part of it? Yeah, but we focus on self-awareness and self-confidence. And you focus on those by making sure that character still matters, by giving the students a voice at a very young age, right? We talk about it like a kind of like a highway, where we go, okay, look, the adults are going to be the guardrails. We're going to be the lane dividers. We want everybody to be safe, right? We want everybody to not crash into each other. You can't slam on the brakes. You can't spin around in traffic. You can't drive the opposite way. So we're going to put some boundaries here so that everybody is safe.
Yeah.
But at that point, then we're pretty much out. Now we've got systems in place where now you're driving your car. And if you want to drive faster over here in this lane, then drive faster. If you want to come over here and drive a little slower, drive a little slower. If you want to take this exit over here and kind of go the scenic route, like, awesome, that's great, right? But you're doing it within the confines of safe boundaries. Right? That's the best explanation for it. We're teaching kids that character matters, but you're driving your own journey from an academic standpoint, from a project standpoint, from a goal setting standpoint. You're driving that journey.
And how young do you start with providing those kids those choices?
Earlier the better, man. I mean, we start at 5 years old here on this campus, and we'll go to 18, right? So honestly, the earlier the better. What's really hard is taking students from a traditional school model and then integrating them. The longer they've been in a traditional school model, the longer it takes them to really actually get personally responsible and be self-driven. A lot of the times.
We can get to it later, but that probably ties directly to the manner in which you're consulting with all these companies on recent college graduates, right? Because they've 100%. Only been in that, and now they actually have freedom,
and they don't know what to do with it,
right?
And they're ineffective with it, right? And the companies are going, and they're just playing school, so they're basically like, hey, what is my job rubric? Can you give me a checklist? I'll do the checklist, but I'm going to do it just enough so that I don't get, the answer wrong. And then I'm going to sit and I'm going to wait for you to come give me my next direction. And then I'm not really going to understand how my role plays into the bigger part. I'm not going to take initiative because initiative is scary and you might get the wrong grade. I don't understand how to communicate with anybody that's older than me or younger than me, because I've always just been with my people in my own date of manufacture, like it's all of these things that you start to see we do systematically in school are a hindrance. And it's more and more so every day.
And you must get that.
I just wonder where.
Go ahead, Al.
I mean, again, like making so many parallels, like where did this come from? And is it the, like, is it the school side? Is it the funding, in the movement side? It's like, I'm hearing you talk and then like I process things in my brain that make sense to me. Right. And I'm like, this is exactly what I talk about with people with movement, is you need to explore movement, right? Fred Duncan said that last podcast. He was like, if you have a kid come in at 12, I'm not going to teach them pin hold exercises.
Right.
Go jump and crawl and move and be on monkey bars and unlearning that stuff with people here is like that. And they're like, okay, well, tell me what to do at home. I'm like,
Take them to the playground.
Start with this, but these are the principles. I need you to be able to bridge that gap between this is what I'm seeing and what are you doing in everyday life? Because it's not me. It's not what I want you to do. It's not, like, I don't need you to think about squeezing your butt muscles, because you're not thinking about squeezing your butt muscles every time you walk. Like, what am I teaching you? I got to teach you to just do it.
Yeah. And the healthcare system.
Where did this come from?
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
And Allison talked about it a lot on some other podcasts where, we will test just to test like somebody's knee, and they'll get an image, and then they're told, oh, your knee is fucked up and you you're not going to be able to do this. So you need surgery. And then they'll go to Allison and she's like, yeah, well, your tendon is well, they already said it. They let the cat out of the bag. Your tendon is abnormal, is matched up. But if you can do what you want to do, moving through pain, through exercises and programs she gives you, it doesn't matter what that image says. It doesn't matter what that standardized test says. It doesn't matter what that data says. If you can accomplish what you want to accomplish, she has been getting people, and this is the freedom of cash-based practice, is not working within parameters that you got to bill to insurance companies. Did we do this? She can get people doing stuff and not thinking about their knee, not thinking about their pain, just thinking about doing things that they don't even know they're not thinking about it anymore. And all of a sudden 6 weeks go by and they're like, you know what? My knee doesn't hurt anymore. Right. But guess what? That image would still tell you that it hurts. And it feels very similar. Yeah. Yeah. And
or they come in and they're no longer talking about pain, talking about what they're suddenly able to do. Right. Like they're talking, like, instead of coming in and saying like, my knee still hurts, they're coming in and be like, I rode my bike. You know what? I realized I got off the ground with my kids. And so I'm not programming the movements in them. I'm just programming the concepts and the positivity and the freedom to some degree. Like well,
that's it. That's exactly right. The real world rewards results, right? Like that's what actually things are based on, is what are the actual results. And the reason that is so scary to, again, a system is because it's non-linear, right? It's not a linear process. Whereas we're taught in school that it's okay, step 1, then step 2, then you go to step 3, then you go to step 4. And if you miss one of these steps, oh my God, it's not going to work out, right? Like everything is this linear thing. Life rewards, what is the outcome? And so that's what Acton does, is goes, okay, all right, what is the outcome that we want to get here? If we're in this project, what does that outcome roughly look like? What do you think you want to create? What is it that you want to do? What is the impact you want to make with this thing? What is the end goal? And then, cool, man, figure out how you want to get there, get creative with it, and then you see what happens. It's a non-linear thinking process, but it allows the creativity to flourish at that point, rather than just looking at one route. We did this experiment, and it was based on a TED talk that we saw of an experiment being done. And so we recreated it here. And it's a test on building the tallest tower out of marshmallows and spaghetti, right? Like dry spaghetti.
Yeah.
And so, you do it with a group of like 5-year-olds, you do it with a group of high school kids, you do it with a group of college kids, and you do it with some MBAs, right? And it goes exactly how you think it would. The younger kids are the ones that make the tallest towers, because they're just looking at, okay, how do we get this tall? And they're not, whereas the MBAs, it's reversed, right? The MBAs do the worst, because they're going, no, there's got to be the right answer. Let's figure this out mathematically. Look at the weight of this, look at the weight, right? So they start to think in an academic fashion, and they end up doing the worst, and they can't communicate with each other, and their creativity is shut down. That's what we're doing in school, is we're shutting people's brains off.
Yeah. And I'm curious, again, to where Allison's question, like, where did this go wrong? And you said it's been this slow burn. And, 30, 40 years ago, sitting there and learning what was on the chalkboard, rewriting it on your pad, memorizing it. I mean, that's how I came up. And I do learn that way. At least for sure, like, things like math or scientific, but and you must get it all the time, from parents. Well, I came up in that system, I came out okay. And
one of the, totally. First, that's one of the worst. I hear it all the time. Yeah, I came out fine.
Right. And I do understand that thought, but then to hang on to it, I don't. So I'm just wondering, like, how did that system, like, why is that system not the way to, why does it shut down more brains today than maybe it didn't 30, 40 years ago? And again, me and Al came up through that system, and I've been contrarian my whole life. Like so that's just naturally been inherent in me. You know, my parents don't even understand it sometimes. Like when I talk to my mom who came up in the education system, I have like, if I could go back and give my MBA away, I would, if I could just get the experience. But she's like, you wouldn't be where you are today if you didn't have the degree. I'm like, no. I was like, so we have those philosophical debates and
understood.
And so I'm just curious, where along did it become like that is good versus that is bad, for lack of, you know, not binary, but
yeah, it's not bad. But again, it's been this slow systemic thing. And I want to challenge that whole concept of, well, I came up through it and I turned out fine.
Yeah, of course,
First of all,
of course.
there's so many things I want to destroy with that logic. First of all, fine sucks. I have no desire for my children to be fine. I have no desire to live a fine life.
Yeah.
Like I want to go out and be able to do the things I want to do. I want to make the impact I want to make. I want to be as happy as I possibly can. I want my kids to, you know, do all of that 10x. Right. So fine sucks. And I would also argue that nobody came out fine because of the school system. You came out fine in spite of the school system, right? There were other factors. You had good parents, you had good community around you.
Yep.
You probably had really good folks that were teachers. You had good friends. You had there was a lot of really good things that happened in there. It wasn't because I went to school that I turned out okay. Those are not, it's not one cause to the other.
Yeah.
Almost never. Right.
And so, keep going.
So systemically speaking, man, there's a reason that if any teachers are listening to this, right, you get your credential process, go through your credential process to get your teaching credential. One person you are never exposed to is John Taylor Gatto, Gatto. And I asked teachers about this, hey, you ever read any John Taylor Gatto? They're like, nope. Go read it and go read anything he ever wrote, and you'll probably leave the profession, or it's going to really cause an issue for you. Right. Because he does about as good a job as anybody ever. He passed away just a couple of years ago. Brilliant guy. Was public teacher for 30 years, New York State Teacher of the Year, multiple years. Like he was a phenomenal educator. He understood that system, but he's also a historian. So he goes into how that Prussian system was brought over precisely to create this factory model, right, that the Rockefellers took control of, and a factory model to create factory workers that were smart enough to follow directions, not quite able to think in a nonlinear fashion to where they started questioning behaviors and going, hey, maybe we can do this better, right? So like that's the mass product that you're trying to produce is essentially this. And then we lived in a time that rewarded that. You could go do that, culturally speaking, and go do your factory job and still provide for your family and buy a house, and all of that could work, right? And then it turned into, hey, now we need more of a filtering system. So we're going to really push college. Everybody's got to go to college to get a good job. And you've got your responsive companies that are going, okay, we've got too many applicants, so we're going to create an extra layer of filtering. So if somebody will go to college, we'll use that as a filtering mechanism, right? So there was this sense of like, yeah, college will help you get a job. And that was true for a certain period of time.
Right.
None of that plays out anymore. Like that doesn't matter in 2021.
No.
Right. So the people that are stuck on that were in education 30 years ago for all that, I get why they're saying that. It's not true now. Right. But even developmentally speaking, like this factory system was never designed to go along with human development. It never coincided with that. And so this Prussian model was brought over. It was also attached by really some more insidious kind of parties that went, cool, we'll let this play out in the public schools. And then after a while, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we start integrating all these other things that will cause cultural decay. We need to start integrating racial issues. We need to start integrating, rhetoric that says, a solid family unit doesn't matter, that morality is subjective, that like all of this. Literally, I can show you documents from 1951 where it was literally all planned out to go over a period of time to start to degrade culture altogether. What's that?
Inch by inch, right?
Inch by inch, man, because a slow boil, because otherwise people would freak out, right? So you do this little by little by little,
which is
you start to integrate all this insidious stuff.
And I think that's why people are finally freaking out now, right? Because they've successfully pushed to the brink, and now it's like there's this heavy reset where it's like part of the reason I started the podcast, right? It's like not only are we, we're going to fix healthcare, or we're going to try and chisel that mountain away and at least educate people, but there's something going on institutionally across everything where we're talking about bullshit issues that don't matter and are making us hate the people that we should be loving, and like all this stuff where it's like we're being like, you can see, you can't unsee it once you see it, and it's like the manipulation and the business models around it to get good people arguing with each other over things that they don't even really care about, because that's just what they see every day, and they're like, oh, this must be important to talk about.
That's right.
So you guys are, for me, Matt knows this, like talking way over my head, right? Like he's deeper into this than I am, and like, some of it I'm I see and all that, and then some of it I'm like, well, what if it is, from the system side, like for school, for example, like I see that kids don't move anymore, ever, in school. And I see that, the brain development that's associated with feet on the ground, hands on things, and all of that is just no longer, and that's science. I mean, that is how the human brain develops. Anybody that's involved with pediatrics will tell you that. And suddenly those are the things that are stripping away out of school, which is what, boggles my mind. And, and that's where, for me to understand, like, where does that come from? And was it to keep up with, other countries with regards to how much information we're getting? Or was it something that's been set as a process? Like, what is that? And, kind of to that point, I have a friend whose kid babysits for me. I have twin 4-year-olds, and she did like a little observation on them. And then, it's in a preschool, and she was telling her mom that, like, my kids, just the way they communicate, were really great, like, in comparison. And, so she was asking me, like, what do you do? I'm like, I don't do anything. They run around barefoot and like almost like the guardrails. Like, I'm in my household, I am making sure none of my kids get killed, quite frankly, by themselves.
Sure.
Like they're just running, and somebody had their arm stuck in something the other day, and I'm just making sure that they don't get.
They're not doing. You don't have them in 4-year-old, 5-year-old soccer. Is your point? Like, you take them to the playground, they go run around outside barefoot.
They run around and do what they're gonna exactly.
Puddles that are disgusting
and discover.
And you probably talk to them like human beings too.
She really does. She really
does.
I mean,
that's like mature adults.
Bingo. But hey, like we have this
like
weird
adults, maybe a little too mature.
You've got this weird cultural issue where people go, you're these 4-year-olds are practicing to be human. We're like, no, they're humans right now. So speak to them like that, and they can understand you, and they will be just as articulate as you are at 4 and 5 years old if you will speak to them like that first, right? And so it's really not that hard. It's simple. It's simple. It's hard because kids are controlled chaos, right? Like, that's what they are. So they got more energy, and they've got more, they're more vigor to want to go explore. So there's, it's hard, but it's not, it's relatively simple. And what you said is, we just want to make sure they don't die. And that's really it. So I was talking to my friend.
So, swear to God, that's my house.
So are you familiar with Savan Matosian? Old school. Okay. So Savan is rad. Old school, he's part of the original CrossFit crew, did all their videos. He's a wonderful filmmaker, and I mean, he's a phenomenal guy, stud athlete, and again was a big part of CrossFit's growth, really to prominence, and he's a brilliant human being, and he knows child development, and he understands how that works. And he and I were chatting, and one of the things he said was, look, my kid falls down, we're outside playing, whatever, my kid falls down, the common narrative is, oh, you go over and then you you help them up, and then oh baby, are you okay? And oh my gosh, right? And you're doing all this. He said, no, your job right there is to then turn around, put your back to them, because you're going to just look out for bears and make sure no bears come out of the woods and come eat them, right? Like when they're falling down, like that's basically, you're making sure no danger is there. And then you're going to let them stand up, because you're not going to rob them of the physical reward of doing that squat where they get to stand up on their own. And you're not going to rob them of that psychological reward where they dust themselves off and get up to go fight another day. Like you're not going to rob them of that, right? Now take that into the school system where everything is laid out in this linear fashion. You just check this box, you just follow this order, you follow this direction, you stand in this line. You're 18, but you raise your hand and ask another human being, can I go to the bathroom? Maybe they say yes, maybe they say no, right? You take that. Dude, we continuously for 12 years, go into 16 if you go into college, we continuously rob humans of the experience to be human, to develop themselves psychologically, physically, and then we wonder why we've got a bunch of broken individuals running around in this country. It's not an accident. It's very simple logic.
Yeah. I mean, and again, like Allison, she said it goes over, you said it went over your head, but go ahead.
I think the way in which you guys talk about it goes over your head, and then I process it my own way, which is kind of cool. That's kind of what we're talking about.
Well, but you're very micro in your field. I jive with Matt watching his stuff, because I've always been like a strategist, Matt. So I've always worked with like the C-level at corporations, like laying out strategy and business cycle plans. So I like making these connections between industries, between sectors. I just like, I see it. And it's just interesting that like that slow burn that you see at the macro level is because little things at the micro level, like parents not letting their kids get up, like that matters. That little action matters. And then you add that up with they sit in the school, and then you add that up with, they have to be in school from this hours. I have to raise my hand to go to the bathroom. And somebody might tell me I can't. And then, then when I get to 22 and I enter the corporate workforce, you think I'm just going to raise my hand and say, oh, I have an idea?
Exactly. Right. So Allison, think of it this way from a physical standpoint too, right? Like like you said, take the kids where they no longer get the physical movement, right? And you see how over time, like you take the physical movement away from the kids, but you do it day after day after day, year after year after year, it progressively gets worse because you've eliminated it, right? And then let's feed them McDonald's. Is feeding them McDonald's one time going to kill them? No. Is it a good idea ever? Really? No. But and hey, here's the deal too. Some people eat McDonald's every day and they can do that for 12 years and be fine, right? They're still alive. And they go, look, it's food, man. I stayed alive. I sustained myself. Where you go, cool. But if you had taken that same amount of time and actually eaten real food, it would be vastly different, period. At some point that catches up with you. Education is the exact same thing, right? It's traditional school is a McDonald's diet for 12 to 16 years. Oof. Yeah, you can be fine. You can be alive in spite of it, but you're not going to be optimizing what humans are actually capable of by doing that.
And one thing that will speak to Allison's language is playtime is like huge. I just saw Tim, like we were talking before the podcast, Tim Kennedy, the MMA, former MMA fighter, huge social following. He's opening one of Matt's academies in Austin, Texas. He just announced it today. Cool. And what he was, like all he was saying in his post is like, kids are going to play with their hands and they're going to get outside. And like, that feels like a very core component of the Acton and Apogee programs, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge part. And again, developmentally speaking, right? So like, yes, especially on the younger side, get outside, dude, play with stuff, play with manipulatives, play with all those kind of things. As you get older and you start to understand how to integrate work-related things, you're going to have to understand how to utilize technology as a tool because it's relevant right now. That's great. But then as they get older, you also want to integrate personal responsibility. So it's not, we don't have, our high schoolers at this point we're not just like, all right, guys, you need to spend your entire day on the monkey bars. Like, no, they need to get outside. They need to move. They need all that stuff too. But then they also need to take on jobs on campus. They need to take on jobs off campus. They need to be doing internships and apprenticeships and creating and starting businesses and failing and right. They need to do all of those things because that's the next logical step for them. Is that's the kind of world that they are coming into. They need to be able to teach themselves how to learn anything they want to. They need to be able to teach themselves to unlearn something that is no longer relevant and will keep them stuck operating in a past mind frame that no longer works in today's world, right? They need those kind of skills. So they get a chance to actually do that while they are here.
Yeah.
So what's the parallel or science, I don't know, what, like concepts used, obviously a hot word is like Montessori and STEM and all that stuff within the education world. For me, for listeners, because if they don't know you and talking about this stuff, and what's the parallel or differences between like, Montessori schools are present like in my area, that allow it, and you see it, they allow a lot more freedom of movement, they allow a pace and all of that. Like where are you falling within that?
Yeah, we're similar to a Montessori in that regard, right? Like where they learn to make choices, because you actually give kids learn to make choices by surprise making choices,
having them,
right? Yeah.
Right.
Yep, it's a weird concept, right? Like all of it's pretty simple as far as the concept. You learn to make choices by making choices. You learn to be responsible by having responsibilities, right? Like it's not rocket science. We just don't do it systemically. That's why it's weird to us. So we are similar to kind of a Montessori 2.0. So Montessori, if anybody ever asks, like on a preschool side, if you've got to send your kid somewhere at a young age, Montessoris are great. I recommend that, all the time. Now, not all Montessoris are the same. Some are very much more around the Montessori method of responsibility and choice. Some have, are drinking the Kool-Aid of, oh, we'll get your child prepared for academia early. And so those are some that you really, they're moving away from actual human development, and I would stay away from those. So we're kind of Montessori 2.0. We want that Montessori feel. Even our youngers here that are 5, 6, 7, they're really still going through more of a Montessori-esque kind of program. But then we will integrate as many tools as we can to allow them to start to not just learn to make choices, but to now direct my own path, direct my own academic path, direct my own, it's like a catalog of, we're essentially going, here's a catalog of experiences that we want you to now choose from. So now I understand how to make choices. So now I'm going to get presented with a buffet, and I'm going to decide, I'm going to try this food, this food, this food, and this food. Right. And I'm going to see how this goes. I'm also simultaneously going to be paired up with these people over here, and we're going to have to collaborate on creating a new food all together and try that and see if we like it. Right. And at the end of the day, I'm going to go, okay, now I'm going to have some points that I can, some points of data. I really liked this food. I really liked this one. I hated this one. When we collaborated, I liked this part of it, but I didn't really like this part. And then you rinse and repeat, and you go into another session where you try something else different and you collaborate around another project, right? So what you end up having over time is somebody who knows, hey, these are all the things I really, really like. These are the things I don't really like. And there's also been a pattern of success right in here. So they have an awareness about the things they enjoy, as well as the things they are good at. And then we can go, okay, well, what is then your unique proposition? How are you going to build a life where you try to combine those things in a unique way? This is what I like. This is what I'm good at. And so this is how I can go impact the world.
And it's got to prepare them for entering the corporate workforce, where they are looking at what's working in the business and asking questions of their higher ups. Why are we doing this? Right. Why aren't we thinking like this? I like what we did here. Has anyone ever thought of X? Right. Cause like that's
or they're a goat, or they're just, on the outskirts where if they're not welcomed to have their thoughts, Matt, you kind of come to my mind, then I'm out. Like, I don't want to be there, and I'm going to go start my own thing.
and I'll go do my own stuff.
Which is beautiful,
Yeah,
right?
they might be able to better analyze a company's culture without even understanding.
You're not challenged. Like if you're not challenged because you have one set and you can't, there's no communication between others, then I mean, that to me is the inside out of a company. That's what, makes it fail, is if you can't integrate everybody.
Yeah, 100%, man. Yeah. I mean, so that's really, kind of that secret sauce is we want them to collect as many experiences as they can, right? And as many real world experiences as they possibly can.
Yeah. And one thing I've seen you mention a lot is that there's no, maybe there is, but there's really no such thing as like grades in terms of 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. It's you integrate kids younger and older together. And that's got to help the younger kids see. Well, of course, because the older kids are probably teaching them, right? And then the younger kids are looking at how they're tackling similar projects when they're working together.
That's
they're like, oh, I see what this person with more experience is doing. I can mimic that.
100%. And it again just helps add another level of keeping the adult irrelevant too. Like that's our goal, is to try to have us become as irrelevant as possible. So when you got the olders that are feeding into the youngers, that allows that to take place. And the olders are, yes, they're getting the opportunity to teach, but they're also getting the opportunity to learn compassion and learning leadership and learning all of those things, right? And the youngers are getting the opportunity to learn from somebody that they consider more of a peer versus an quote unquote authority figure. And then both of them are getting the awareness that age does not automatically denote a certain type of social hierarchy, right? Whereas like in traditional school, talk to the people that are your age. If they're younger, you look down on them, you crush them. Those are your servants. If they're older, automatic reverence, right? Like all those, that doesn't play out. Dude, that's not real. No, that's not how life works. No, we're not the three of, I don't know how old you guys are, but are you guys 40? I'm 41. Are you guys 41?
I'm 40.
You're 40. Okay. So we can probably still talk to each other, right? Because we're close enough to the same age,
right?
Because dear God, so Allison, she's younger than us, right? So we shouldn't even be talking to her, man. We should just be crushing her, right? And putting her down because it's silly. It's obviously not the way that life works. So it shouldn't work shouldn't be integrated early on either.
Yeah. That's really cool stuff. So how does, I'm just squeezing in as much as we can here in the next 20 minutes, but so how does, I'm interested in like the nuts and bolts of how that curriculum actually looks. You know what I mean? Like how, like, are your students now when they're 18, are they now going to universities once they graduate, or are they just like, you know what, I'm ready to do my own thing and enter the workforce? Is it a mix? Obviously it's a mixture, but
it's a mixture, right? It's a mixture because life is a mixture. Like what is, again, like we get trained like, okay, but does everybody has to go to university, right? So are they going to university?
Yeah.
If they want to, then yeah.
Right.
If they don't want to, then no. Right? Like it's really that simple. If they want to go start their own business, they're starting their own business. If they want to go into other programs, they're going into other programs.
So how do colleges look at them and evaluate them if you're not putting them through all those standardized tests? Because the colleges are part of this problem, right? And the universities. And
hell yes.
They have all these check marks of like, when I see an applicant, I got to see boom, 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 boom.
That's that whole college thing. So the college thing is a game. Right, like admissions to college is the beginning of the game, right, and then when you're in college, it's a game too. And again, that's becoming something that is more and more irrelevant as we go forward. Like
you can feel it cracking, right? Like,
dude, forget cracking. Like it's only being held up by people's fear. Like that's it. Otherwise, it would just completely crumble. It's being held up by fear. It's been held up by fear, money, agendas, all the same stuff that public schools are being held up. I confidently say 90% of high school grads would be better off without it at this point. Confidently, like there's more ways. Confidently say 90%.
Yeah, I mean the prior administration, not to get into politics, but they pushed something through. I think where it was more like you can look at skill sets versus degrees.
Right. Which makes sense, right? You should be able to go do, and so there are universities that are moving towards, hey, maybe we offer like a certification where, you come in and if you want to go into physical therapy, like that. Maybe, hey, weird idea, maybe that's what you study. Not like, that's great, you want to go into physical therapy, but you need to take this women's liberation of 18th century Moroccan, what, like all this weird crap, right? And you got to pay thousands of dollars for it because you want to be a physical therapist. That doesn't make any sense. So there's universities that are moving towards that. There are also other programs that are popping up that allow you to just focus on what you want to do and what you want to learn. And then, hey, there's this thing called the internet. You guys have probably heard of it, where you can actually learn almost everything on your own. Right. There are certain things, of course, that, you need some hands-on practical experience, but there are ways to do almost everything for free at this point. So is it about the degree or is it about the skill? Right. Because those are different things. And even that, you get the degree and then you go in and you don't actually have the skills to do the job. You got to learn it on the job.
You were a C+ student.
So exactly. So like, that whole thing is crazy. So the college admissions thing is a game anyways. It's actually a very easy game to play. So we always tell our kid, like, if you want to go to college, great. There's easy, like, you just figure out what that entrance game looks like and you play the game. More importantly, why do you want to play the game in the first place? If you can articulate a good reason and you have a good trajectory and there's a need for it, cool, man. Like, let's go.
And that's where the adults have the bigger impact in your schools then, right? It's like they've
helping as a mentor.
Correct. And like helping them lay out what choices they do have. Because now through your program, they've gone through decision making and having choices. So they just need to understand what those choices are. And then you give it to them, right? So
I mean, that's it. And most people don't even understand what those choices are. And I mean, there's when I tell parents that one of the easiest ways to get into college is for their kids to drop out of school and not graduate high school, they look at me like I'm crazy. But I want them to understand, like, there is the common narrative and then there's reality.
Right.
And when it comes to education, here's the reality. Like, we're going to operate in the reality where almost everybody else is over here operating under the common narrative.
Right. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, just one other thing was, you brought this up way in the beginning, but, when you're allowing people to be themselves, the self-trust. I mean, Stephen Covey has a book of, Speed of Trust, I think it's called. And really no other trust can happen with anybody else unless you trust yourself. And if you're not teaching somebody to do what they want or, push them in one way or, again, for me, my skill set is movement. If you don't trust that you are going to be able to do this, then you're not going to be able to do it. So let's break that down. And what are the keys to you to allow that to happen? And I think building that trust is so hard, is that you see a ton of that. And I mean, with chronic pain or musculoskeletal pain that's not managed, the ability to develop, social circles is a huge part of chronic pain, I just heard a story, one of my colleagues in a mentorship group was telling me the other day of, talking about a woman who wanted to run. And she was so upset that she couldn't run because she couldn't be in the running group, because in the running group, she was looking for a partner. So there was two layers of social need for this human being that she couldn't get because she couldn't run. And that was her way. So when she lost a piece, she lost her identity, and that impacted her pain more than anything. So I just think that's, an interesting piece to what you're doing is talking through self-trust. And that was a term that came up early in what you're doing with what you're doing.
That's exactly it. Like, you have all these, you think of like a Tony Robbins and the Wayne Dyers and the Brian Tracys and all these guys. They're phenomenal guys, and they're labeled that self-help, kind of deal, right? But what they're trying to get people back to that. I trust myself. I know who I am. I'm happy there, and I can build a life now. Whether that's social, emotional, financial, physical, whatever that is, because I have all of that, right? That's awesome. We need that. but I'm very much on the Frederick Douglass train of it's easier to build strong kids than it is to fix broken men. I want to put those guys out of business by not allowing our people to go down that rabbit hole so far in the first place. You let kids understand how to do that from the get-go. You don't need to try to fix them later.
Yeah. It's going to be, and it has been a recurring message already in our early going here with Allison. You know, people go to physical therapy and they just want her to do stuff to them.
Yep.
Where she's just like, no, you're going to get and try and balance on this ball or stand on one foot and relearn that stuff. But, you know, she's working with everyone, but you get into that older population, even people our age, where we were trained to like, okay, fix me,
fix me. And give me, what's the pill?
Right.
Give me the magic pill, man.
And so in our field that we're preaching here, we are actually trying to fix broken men and women, you know? So now part of doing that is to like, we're educating, you know, part of our initial movement podcast was, you know, teaching the activity levels for kids and stuff they should be doing too. So there, you know, so we're trying to preach that message, get them early. We're trying to take patience out of Allison's pocket, really.
But then what you're saying too is that they need to take the responsibility to help themselves too, right? Like you can only do so much.
It's the matrix, right? We're trying to show them the door. You got to open it.
You got to open it. You got to walk through the door, right? I mean, it's exactly that. Like we can only give you so much. I tell, you know, our students all the time, whether it's at Acton or whether it's Apogee, you know, you can join the best gym in town with all the best equipment and the best trainers, and they can put you on the best program. But if you do not show up to the gym and actually do it, nothing changes. It's a pretty simple concept. Right. Physically, that's what you guys are talking about. Educationally, is what we're talking about. This Acton's not magic. We're laying out a roadmap, but if you don't follow the roadmap, nothing happens.
And fitness and movement is like one of those things where people can learn that and see the results almost immediately. So it's like it reteaches and builds that frame of mind. You know, again, I don't know if I shared with you, like our podcast is the body movement, and body is built on developing yourself. Like that's our acronym. So it's like, but to get there, you have to like, we really have to break down the mindset of like people like, I heard this program's good. I heard this exercise is good for me. I heard this will fix me. And it's like that, those aren't even the right words to be using. And it's like this heavy reset needs to happen. And it's, again, like you're doing education, healthcare, the financial system and all the printing of money and how that's gone on. It's like, it's this common thing where people are so trained and
they're looking for the quick fix. It's those quote mongers like you mentioned at the beginning, right? They want to post the quote because it sounds motivational, but they don't want to live their life around the concept.
The other side of that is the ability of whomever is the abiding person, force, is that connection with the individual, right? I mean, if you are in something where you have to get through stuff and, you know, I mean, I think some of the most influential people in my life were teachers and trainers I had. And I think you still see that in the current education system, is that teachers are the ones who have the most influence on kids. Now, is that being hampered at times because they can't, you know, like for me, like when I see 75 patients in a week, I can't give them everything I got. When I see 25 patients in a week, now that's almost too much for me. You know, now it's like 20 patients a week is pretty happy
because you found
that I can give them everything I have.
You found that number.
But then they change because somebody's entrusting in them.
Right.
Where if you're not allowed, like, you know, so I play two sides of that, of like, yes, you 100%, you have to do the work 100%. But the people that are around you, that you're surrounding yourself with, should be lifting you up and encouraging you to do so and making you feel better about yourself, you know, not telling you what you can't do, not telling you that you suck at this, not telling you this, more like, oh, you know, point out the positives. Positive reinforcement.
You just highlighted too, one of the hardest parts about being in education is not only we can do all of this here, right, with on our campuses, and we can develop these systems to allow these young people to figure out who they are and to support each other. And we can be super supportive. If they go home and the conversations are different at home, whether the parents just aren't as supportive or whether the parents are living in complete fear, whether the parents are still conditioned and they're like, oh my gosh, okay, but you need a bunch of math homework tonight. And I can't believe the school didn't assign you this and you've got to go for it. Right. Then it's a losing proposition.
Absolutely.
Right.
Totally.
Right.
Yep.
Very cool, Matt. So I want to finish up because I want to get into your work with corporate America because I'm super interested
Sure.
in that.
Yeah.
So I know. So again, we kind of touched on this, and from my understanding, you kind of are hired by many of the Fortune 500 companies nationwide, globally, even to work with their leadership, to work with their young entry level folks, and do what with them is the question. But I'm also curious because again, I've worked at Madison Square Garden, Fox Sports. I was in, I consulted and with some major consulting firms. I have a problem with corporate America as a big part of this problem too.
Yeah.
So the fact that they're even hiring you to do this means their people are some of the broken men and women that aren't capable of teaching these people how to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious on what you're actually consulting with, like what you're teaching the young people, and more so how you're correcting the people in leadership positions that can't get the best out of them.
Yeah, it is multifaceted. So we talk about it in a blanket of like bridging generational gaps, right?
Yeah.
Because those gaps inherently, the gap goes both ways, right? If you got a gap between something, it's not a one-way gap. It's a gap between both.
Right.
So you're exactly right. So it's coming in and, the organizations are saying, hey, we're having a hard time recruiting and retaining good young talent, where once we do get that talent in the door, we're having a hard time, again, not just the retention side, but like the leadership side of it. We're seeing them just continue to play school. We can't, we feel like it's taking them forever to really integrate and get on board, right? So leadership is seeing this. The young people are coming in a lot of times not knowing any better because they listen to everybody, and you got to go to college and you play the school game. So they don't really necessarily know what they don't know. And they're like, dude, and these old people don't know how to talk to us, right? They don't know how to communicate with us. So there's usually communication barriers that are going both ways. There's different definitions. Things have changed so rapidly. You have different definitions for even, basic terms that you hear in businesses. So like leadership, you just say leadership or communication, right? And just those terms alone,
empty buzzwords.
A traditionalist versus a boomer versus a Gen Xer versus a millennial versus a Gen Z, they all have different definitions of what that looks like. And then they're all working together. So what they're not doing is having the conversations where Gen Z's like, well, this is what communication looks like. I've never not had this thing in front of me. I've grown up with this. I've grown up with the internet. I've grown up with choices. I've grown up with YouTube and Netflix telling me what I'm going to watch next. I've grown up with, I need something delivered to me. So I go like this and it comes. I've grown up with instant, this, and you've got the boomers who had a very different experience growing up. And so communication to them is, no, you get on the phone and you have a phone call, or you go look at somebody face to face. The texting is impersonal, right?
Yeah.
You have all of these various things that don't get talked about, and it creates issues. And so you end up spending, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, you spend all your time on the wrong stuff rather than moving the organization forward.
Right.
And so the organizations understand that there is opportunity cost that is being lost in these wasted conversations. There are the losing people because they can't come together and there's no congruency, right? So I come in all various capacities, whether it's here's how to actually look for great young people. And hey, by the way, guys, stop doing it based on college. Stop wanting resumes. Nobody cares about a resume, and you don't either.
Right.
Here's how to utilize social media to understand who you're hiring. Here's how to actually find great people before they even get to college age. And here's how to create those relationships, right? So you can start from there. I mean, depends on the organization, but there's so many different ways we can do this. And then I can work with the young people too and say, look, here's why they want to communicate this way. Here's their background. Here's how they grew up. This is why this makes sense to them. So what you need to do is figure out how to bridge that gap. You need to understand they're thinking this way. So here's how you approach it. Here's how you provide value. Here's how you look at the bigger context and really show yourself as somebody that's going over and above. It's so multifaceted because it is just generational in general.
And we're in that generation right in between there, right? Like we're old enough to remember what it was like for the boomers, because we lived that. Like, you know, when we were not home, we always like when we were not home, the note that we left on the floor telling us where we were, be back at this time. That's how we communicate. Like, once if you got a note on the floor as like a boyfriend or girlfriend in our house, you were like you were in the family, because like, oh hey, like food's in the fridge. Love mom and dad. I won't be home till this time. Yeah.
Right. Or if you and me were like, hey, we're gonna go meet our buddies and everybody's gonna ride their bike and they're gonna meet over here at the park at this time, right? And one dude didn't show up.
Yeah.
It was like, all right, man, I guess he can't come. We're out. We're not texting. When I was like, dude, guess maybe he died. I don't know. Like, we're gone, dude. We're out. Right.
But then the influx of technology came when we were still young enough to get it.
Right.
So it feels like, I mean, I guess that's
an advantage.
It's an advantage where you can see that. And I guess it may be generationally, it does take a demographic of somebody in our age range that have seen that too.
It is. It is an advantage, right? We do have an advantage there. It's part of it's age wise. It's part of the reason that older millennials, younger Gen X's, right, are in leadership positions, but it is also part of that is an advantage because we do have that. We can almost be translators in between the multiple generations, right? That is advantageous in corporate America. And we're more apt to want to go, okay, let's fix the problem, because we do understand both sides. We're not inherently angry at one or the other and really on like, you know, my generation has it figured out, you suck and you suck, you know, we're not necessarily stuck there as much.
Yeah. It's just that level of frustration at not being able to translate. Right. So it's just, I guess that's the gap for you. That's why you have a job doing that. Right.
That's why it's never, I mean,
always. Are the corporations complicit in all of this though, with their quarterly reviews and employee review rating systems and the way that they'll scour social media for the way they don't like that post you said? I mean, hey man, I follow you, like you're countering that, or like, I agree with you on a lot of stuff, dude. Like I don't think you're masking your kids at school at Acton academies. Like, I don't think, you know, you've been very pro-choice on the vaccine stuff. Like, these are stuff like, if I'm a job applicant coming out of school and I do share the beliefs that I just mentioned, whether I do or not important. Corporations will hold that against the people in the hiring. And then if you get in, you're in that standardized testing of yearly reviews and 1 through 5s. And so is that part of when you go in, you're like, I don't even need to work with the young kids. Sometimes you guys your hiring practices are out of whack, or you're
100%, 100%. And it usually takes 100%. And it's usually like one person that's kind of like, you know, in that they're in their, you know, I don't know I don't know if we want to label the phase, but they're in that like, hey, we're seeing the issues here internally, just much like what we're talking about. And they're like, hey, I need to try to fix this internally. Like, you know, I definitely in the education system was like, what can I do to try to fix this while I'm in here? And then it was ultimately like, you know what, I need to go build something different. Right. But I was in that stage of like, can I fix this while I'm here? Right. A lot of these organizations, you'll have that one, you know, those 1 or 2 leaders that are like, man, can I try to fix this while I'm here? And Matt, come in and I'm going to allow you to be the hammer. I'm going to allow you to come in and try to throw something and see if this stirs up conversation. And I'm right. So, you know, my hat's off to them, because they're open to that, you know. And then sometimes it really is there really are some organizations that do have a good amount of leadership that understand the need to not, this is the way it was always done sort of thing, right? They understand that shifts are happening. And so they're proactive on it. There are those organizations out there.
Yeah. I feel like some of the organizations that you mentioned to me when we talked a couple of weeks ago, when you agreed to do this, but I feel like some of them would be the first to, if you were coming out of school, look at some of the stuff you posted on social media and say, that guy's out. We can't have that guy like represent our company. But, you know, but then they still come to you as an outsider, as a consultant, and hire you. So
there's some that I have definitely, there are some of the organizations that I have worked with maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago that I have definitely ostracized myself with some of the things as I've continued to be vocal around things, because they'll posture in some way around choice and wanting things different. But then, you know, over these last few years, as things have come down to where it's like, hey, you got to play one side or another, then now it's like, hey, that's great, we hired you in the past, and they wouldn't hire me again. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. But there's, but I've also planned for that. And I went from 60 to 70, keynotes and consultation trips, every year to minimal so that we could build these.
Yeah. I'm inspired talking to you because, I'm still dabbling, getting back into corporate American leadership games, and, I've been effective there and I'm cool with it, but it just feels like to make the societal change of the way we're talking to each other, like the conversations we're having today in society, like we have to have them. Like we have to get through this, and people have to understand that I might have completely different views than the way you're looking at the world. And I have to put that on social because that's where the conversation's happening, and it actually does make an impact. But I'm going to supplement it with what we're doing here. I'm going to show you, like, I'm taking these principles that I'm standing on, I'm building something. And that might just take that whole mess of corporate virtue signaling out of the mix by doing your own thing.
Man. Because you actually have real conversations. You got to realize the social is part of, like, you're getting snippets. And so then invite conversation. You're not going to have real conversation over social. Usually it's going to take platforms like this, right?
It's supposed to give a window,
right? Have these kind of actual conversations, like people have to be willing to do that. But again, that's, you got to have something more than just fear in your back pocket in order to do that. Fear can drive social media conversations. It can't drive stuff like this because we, at some point we can get to a topic where all three of us completely disagree on something. That's fine. That's humanity, right? Of course.
And I think, it's funny because we're going through, so the gentleman I work with, we're going through building right now, right? And so it's like, okay, we start to have some type of manual, because right now it's kind of me and him flying by the seat of our pants, and we do well with that. But if we bring people on, you kind of can't do it like we're doing it. His wife trained us, and she's like, you two are just crazy. And so, we both recognize that that's our skill set. So you have to have those things in place with regards to that. But we talked through, like, a performance appraisal, like, what are we going to do? And we're like, he's like, I hated those. And I was like, me too. I hated delivering them. I loved sitting with employees and spending time with them. But I didn't like marking a box at all. So we're like, we're not doing that. We're going to sit and have conversations about goals, and more than once a year, like weekly.
If you're working closely together and collaborating, that should just be instant feedback all the time. And if you're man or woman enough, you should be able to tell whoever up and down the chain, this doesn't work for me. I don't agree with what you're saying. I'm not getting enough out of you.
That environment too, to allow people to disagree with you and not feel threatened by it.
And hey, you let me down here. I thought I could count on you for this. These were my expectations, and not take it personally. If you're having that, who needs an evaluation 1 through 5?
Right. So it's interesting to hear you, like, with these things too, because we're in the midst of building, and building something we want to be bigger. But there's so many things we didn't like that we aren't going to do. We're going to make our own ways. We're going to cover our ass, we're going to make sure we're legally sound and ready for things. But it's fun to work it from a different angle, for sure.
And then if you're paying attention, you'll switch it in a year too, because you'll figure out these parts of it worked. This over here, it's not working so much. So then you'll go back to the entire team again, because everybody's, you've created a structure where the mission is really the boss, right? And then you go and sit back and go, hey, are we really hitting that target? Or what is the piece we're missing? Okay, cool. Let's switch it, right? Like, that's what organizations have to do at this point in order to be impactful and effective.
Love it.
I love it, man. We're short on time. There's so much. Maybe we'll have you back, buddy, because there's so much. I know, based on, all those, again, some of the quotes you share, it sounds like you're big into like Stoic philosophy and reading some of the great historians, which I'm just actually getting into. We had Michelle Tafoya on our podcast from NFL a few podcasts ago. She introduced us to Ryan Holiday's book, Obstacles the Way. And now I'm reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and like I'm like totally like mind blown right now. So I know you share that stuff, and you talk about like young boys becoming real men in today's world, and I'd love to put a pin in that and have you back as we keep growing to talk some of those bigger society issues that I think you're addressing at Acton and Apogee, right?
We're trying.
Yeah. All right, man. So Matt Beaudreau, where can everyone find you on social? Find your academy. You want to plug that real quick, and then we'll just we'll duck out.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah, just my name on any kind of social platform, Matt Beaudreau, and then go to actonacademy.org, and you can see if there's any Actons in your area, and we're putting a bunch out there. And then, if anybody's interested in checking out the Essential 11 podcast, please do. And Apogee Strong, if you got a young man that can use some direction and purpose.
Yeah, I shared on social your TED talk when your very first one a few years ago when you were a clean shaven young man.
Thanks, man. I was, I looked like 14, 15 years younger.
Have to check that out.
It was an epic 10 minutes, and it was like right when you were just starting the budding of this idea, right? And
it was right at the onset, man. So, and it was one of those things where I always tell people, I look back, I can't even watch it at this point. Like I look at it and go, I can't. Not that the ideas were wrong, because I still believe wholeheartedly in what I was sharing. I've done 380 or something keynotes since then. And I look back and I'm like, oh man, I can't even, from the technical point of view. But we got another TED talk coming up in October. Yeah. So I'm going to make sure I blow that one out of the water.
Yeah, we'll look out for that. There was the line about just being in school of getting on the conveyor belt and getting a prepackaged prescribed program, and then you fall off and you repeat it, and you're like, that was like a rap all-time verse bars for me, those 4 or 5 lines. So it's one of the reasons I reached out. It's like, somebody seeing problems and solving and diagnosing the problems correctly. So we're going to try and keep doing that there, and inspired by what you're doing, man. It's been great having you and hearing your story.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. And you guys keep up the good work too, man. It's needed.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and we will see you on the next episode of the B.O.D.Y Podcast with Dr. Allison Sinikowski, fucking the system.